May the world become peaceful. May all men and women be gentle and honest. May all think of mutual welfare. May the minds of all be turned to the highest good. May there be devotion in the hearts of all to the Supreme Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. It was Thursday, July 16th, 1920, and things were very quiet in Holy Mother's sick room at Udbodhan House in Calcutta. She had been at Udbodhan since returning from Jaramati in late February. In spite of the masterful management of Swami Saradananda and treatment from many noted physicians in Calcutta, Mother's condition had gone from bad to worse. By this point, her legs were so swollen she could not move from her bed. It was also observed that she was shaking off all of her worldly attachments, one by one. On this particular day, a woman devotee who had known Sri Ramakrishna and is known to us only as the mother of Annapurna came to visit Holy Mother. Since no one but Mother's attendants were allowed in the room, she stood at the door to at least have Mother's darshan. When Mother noticed the devotee, she beckoned her to come nearer. After bowing down to Mother, the woman said in a tearful voice, "Mother, what will happen to us?" Mother replied in a barely audible voice, "Why should you be afraid? You have seen the Master. What should frighten you?" Then she slowly added, "Let me tell you something, my child. If you want peace of mind, then do not find fault with others. Rather, learn to see your own faults. Learn to make the whole world your own. No one is a stranger, my child. This whole world is your own." These few words, spoken to a single devotee, are considered by many to be the Mother's final message to suffering humanity. Although not literally Mother's last words, for she spoke little during this time, she gradually lost the power of speech entirely before she passed away 5 days later on Tuesday, July 21st, 1920. Holy Mother fulfilled many roles in her life and is frequently idealized as the mother of everyone who had the good fortune to come in contact with her. But after Ramakrishna's death particularly, she fulfilled an important role as teacher and guru and was known for taking in those even the saintly direct disciples turned away. Like Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother's disciples included both householders and monks. As their guru, many came to her with their doubts, problems, and questions, to which she invariably provided wise counsel. In simple words, she responded to their concerns and challenges in living in the world while seeking God. Her answers were no less profound than those of Ramakrishna himself, which should be no surprise to those who consider Mother and the Master to be one and the same. In her conversations, she addressed all the major topics of spiritual life: prayer, meditation, discipline, renunciation, self-effort, grace, discrimination. Yet Mother's teachings do not receive much attention, perhaps because teaching was not her primary role. It was not what she was known for, perhaps in part because her teachings were given to individuals less inclined to write books about them, as were so many in Ramakrishna's orbit. In any case, we are fortunate to have the available recordings of Mother's teachings, including the one for which she is primarily known: "If you want peace of mind, do not find fault with others." It is an exceptionally important teaching, for if we don't have peace of mind, what do we have? So we will spend some time looking at this issue from different angles, seeing why it is appropriate, why we need peace of mind, how neuropsychology can help us understand the challenge, how humility is intricately involved, and finally, some ways of putting the teaching into practice. In the process, since I love good quotes, I will subject you to many of my favorites along the way. In the West, We are generally unaccustomed to the idea of personal spiritual instruction. We tend to assume that all spiritual teachings are public knowledge and meant for everyone who hears them. But before earnestly following any spiritual teaching from any spiritual teacher, regardless of their stature, we need to ascertain whether it really applies to us or not. A good example are Jesus' words to the rich young ruler, "Sell all that you have and distribute it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me." Which of us are ready to do that? The words of an enlightened teacher are perfectly chosen for the ears of those who hear them, at the time and in the circumstances in which they are spoken. So as spiritual aspirants, we need to exercise appropriate discrimination about which teachings we choose to follow. Swami Saradeshananda says that Vivekananda's words of caution about publishing the sayings of Ramakrishna can be summarized in two ways. Some teachings are relevant to particular persons in particular situations and are not applicable to all people or in all conditions. These teachings must be applied carefully according to time, place, and condition. Other kinds of teachings, however, were meant for everyone and could be applied under all circumstances. To avoid being misled by following the wrong teachings, we need to view all teachings with some discrimination and be selective about which ones we follow, considering the teaching itself as well as our ability to put it into practice. So, how does, if you want peace of mind, do not find fault with others, hold up to this kind of teaching discrimination? Hopefully fairly well, since I based this whole lecture on it. First, the words were spoken at a time in Mother's life when the last things she seemed to be interested in were talking to or relationships with individuals. She had already detached herself from Gauri-Ma, Radu, and Radu's child, with whom she'd had long-standing relationships, and was generally not interested in talking at all. Yet she went out of her way to beckon the woman devotee. Upon hearing the woman's concern about what would happen to her after Mother's passing, she reassured the woman personally with the reminder that she had seen the Master, so there was nothing to be frightened of. Following this, as if to add a postscript to be shared with all of her children who might be similarly concerned, Mother provided a concise guide for living peacefully in the world. Find your own faults instead of others. Feel everyone in the world to be your own. When Sarah Bull and Sister Nivedita prevailed on Holy Mother to have her picture taken, she agreed, most likely knowing that it would later be worshipped by devotees the world over. Similarly, in reassuring the mother of Annapurna, Holy Mother probably knew that her words of advice and encouragement would be passed along to benefit devotees for ages to come. Mother had said similar things to others, so this wasn't the first time she had counseled on the hazards of fault-finding. She herself had struggled with a tendency and knew that it was a challenge for most of her many children. She knew firsthand of its consequences and also understood the many benefits of not finding fault. Also, many people of significant spiritual stature have called these words Mother's last message to humanity and found them worthy of wide quotation. It's on the cover of Swami Nikhilananda's excellent biography of Holy Mother. You may also be aware of the meal prayer we recite in which Swami Sarvagatananda included this teaching of Holy Mother. So there's no sense that these words were interpreted as applying only to the woman devotee who had the privilege of hearing them. Finally, several of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna have voiced similar teachings, including Swamis Brahmananda, Premananda, Turiyananda, Adbhutananda, and Ramakrishnananda. For these reasons, we can feel very comfortable that this teaching of Holy Mother is appropriate for everyone who hears it under all circumstances, of course, to the extent that we are willing and able to follow it. Mother began this teaching by saying, "If you want peace of mind," followed by advice on how to achieve it. It wasn't stated as an admonition or command, something we had to do, but conditionally. If you want this, then do that. She left it for us to decide, according to our own free will and best judgment, whether the goal, peace of mind, was worth the cost, not finding fault with others. Of course, all the best teachings are like that. It's up to us to decide whether we believe them seriously enough to put them into practice. There's always a benefit and always a cost. Holy Mother obviously felt strongly enough about the value of peace of mind that she made it the centerpiece of her last message. What then is peace of mind, and why is it important? We can begin with a simple look at the words themselves, which are just as they sound, no hidden meanings here. They describe a state in which the mind is utterly calm, at ease, and untroubled by worry. The Bhagavad Gita has a lot to say about this state. From the second chapter, the person of self-control, moving among objects with his senses under restraint and free from attachment and hate, attains serenity of mind. In this verse, Krishna is telling us that we can have serenity or peace of mind, but it is dependent on how we regard the objects of the world. If we dwell on sense objects and let them push or pull us around, we lose the equanimity of mind that peace depends upon. We can't live in this world without moving through its objects. At the most basic level, we need food and shelter to maintain the physical body. We can learn, though, to restrain our senses and to minimize the attraction and repulsion to objects so natural to beings whose primary senses face outward. Then, regardless of whether the objects are pleasant or unpleasant, the peace and evenness of the mind are preserved. And with that, there is the added benefit of God's grace. As Krishna says later, he who is alike to foe and friend, unaltered in honor and dishonor, who is the same in cold and heat, in pleasure and pain, who is free from attachment, who is unchanged by praise and blame, who is silent, content with whatever he has, homeless, firm of mind, and full of devotion, that person is dear to me. The Gita continues, in that serenity there is an end of sorrow, for the intelligence of the person of serene mind soon becomes steady. The person whose mind is not under his control has no self-contemplation, no self-knowledge, and no contemplation either. Without contemplation, he can have no peace, and without peace, how can he have happiness? Serenity that produces an end to all sorrow is an amazing thought. In this context, it refers to what happens when we possess appropriate discrimination between good and evil, right and wrong. With true discrimination, we're able to navigate the many shoals of worldly objects and achieve a peaceful, steady mind, where steady refers to being centered on the real self, cap S. Without a controlled mind, contemplation of the nature of the real self is not possible. And without contemplation, it is not possible to achieve the peace of mind which alone leads to true happiness. So peace of mind is a desirable quality for all of us. It means not being buffeted by the ceaseless worries and anxieties so prevalent in our world of economic uncertainty, political unrest, and environmental instability. True peace of mind doesn't mean we don't have troubles, but that we're able to rise above them, even while living through them. It is a state characterized by inner calmness and tranquility, free from obsessing thoughts and disturbing actions. And while true peace of mind is achieved internally, it is reflected externally. So our peace also becomes the peace of others around us. There are few states that have only upsides and no downsides, but peace of mind is certainly one of them. Now that we've addressed the if part of Mother's teachings, it's time for the hard part, the then part. As I found on one web search, quote, so often people want to know what they should do to gain peace of mind, but rarely do they inquire as to what they should stop doing to gain peace of mind. It's kind of like learning to float, where it's not so much about what you do to float, but more about what you should not be doing that gets in the way. This teaching is definitely in that stop-doing category. Let's begin with how Holy Mother herself reached this state of understanding. We know from Holy Mother's life that she had an innate affinity for devotion and purity. In talking about her early days at Dakshineswar, she said, "On moonlit nights I would look at the reflection of the moon in the placid water of the Ganges and piteously pray to God with tearful eyes, 'O Lord, there are stains even on the moon, but let my mind be absolutely stainless.'" Recognizing the stain on her character from criticizing others, she later described praying in a similar way. In Vrindavan, Yogit and I used to repeat mantra long hours with great joy. Flies would sit on our eyes and lips and make sores, but we were not aware of it. One day I prayed to Radharaman, which is an aspect of Krishna as the lover of Radha. "Lord, please take away my fault-finding nature. May I never see other people's blemishes." Interestingly, in other accounts, Mother said she prayed to the Master, meaning Sri Ramakrishna, though she was referring to the same time of prayer at Vrindavan. For Holy Mother, Krishna and the Master were obviously one and the same. Swami Parameshwarananda wrote, quote, "One night at Jarambadi I was massaging the Mother's feet and referring to the bickering and disorderliness of Kwalpara Ashrama. I asked her, 'Mother, we have renounced the hearth and home and everything in the name of Sri Ramakrishna and come to work for him. Then why do we have so much quarreling and friction among ourselves?' The Mother replied, 'Look, my son, the source of trouble is to see fault between one another. It happens when one sees others' fault. Once this happened to me and I would see fault in others, and I could not get rid of it. Finally, I prayed to the Master earnestly, 'Master, may I not see fault in others, and instead see their good qualities.' From then on, that attitude had completely disappeared from my mind. If I would see a little good quality in anybody, I saw it in a magnified way. If you want peace, don't see fault in others." Mother was adamant about not finding fault in others, even when asked to do so. Nikhilnanda writes, quote, "One day an inmate of the Udbodhan was severely taken to task for his wrong conduct. Holy Mother was asked to reprimand the guilty man. 'I cannot do it,' she firmly remonstrated. 'I cannot see others' faults. I am simply not made that way. There are enough people to criticize others. Surely the world will not come to an end if I refrain from doing so.'" What a great thought, that the world will not come to an end if we do not find fault with others. May we think of that the next time we're about to voice faults. Somehow, we tend to think that calling out the shortcomings of others and suggesting how they could live their life better is doing them or the world a favor, as if we have some special insight or authority. Author and motivational Zig Ziglar said, "Some people find fault like there's a reward for it." He also said, "There has never been a statue erected to honor a critic." If we think about it, how many of us actually feel something positive comes out of being told what we're doing wrong? These remarks by an English professor make the point well. Quote, "As a college English teacher, I find that very few people other than my students ever want me to read stuff that they write. There's a very simple reason for this, too. In their experience, they've found that English teachers look for the flaws and point them out, and they simply don't want to put themselves up for that kind of criticism. I learned this early, and I don't point out things like misspellings or grammatical errors unless somebody wants me to do so, but that usually doesn't help. Once someone finds out what I do for a living, they want to avoid having someone else find fault in their work." How do you react the last time someone told you about your faults, or even worse, told others about them? A normal reaction is to be offended and to add some degree of separation with the person making the remarks. Fault-finding often adds a negative element to a relationship. We tend to redefine the limits of trust and sharing between us. We're put off, and so we put the other off as well. When I know that someone is going to find fault with things that I do, I'm much less likely to share with that person unless I'm really seeking criticism. And as fewer people are willing to share with me, I lose some of the richness that comes from that sharing, and I become isolated, less integrated. The same English teacher said, "Fault-finding and criticizing, no matter what our intentions, tends to drive wedges between us and other people. A person who finds fault in everything is a person to be avoided when all is said and done, and who among us wants other people to avoid us whenever they can?" Speaking of the faults of others rarely has a positive effect and frequently causes hard feelings or compromises our relationships with absolutely no benefit. Holy Mother often asks the devotees not to hurt others, even by a harsh word. She said, "One must not speak unpleasant truths unnecessarily. By indulging in rude words, one's nature becomes rude." Of course, being gentleness itself, what Mother called rude words would probably be only mildly accusative to us. Regardless, Mother's example tells us we do not have to find fault with others, that the world will go on just fine if we do not, and in fact will be better by our abstinence. On one occasion, a monk at Udbodhan objected to visits by a class of women who were considered immoral. Holy Mother replied, "If they are prevented from coming here, I will leave the place." On another occasion, she remarked, "The mind is everything. It is in the mind alone that one feels pure or impure. A person first makes his own mind guilty and then sees another's fault. Can you injure anybody by enumerating his faults? You only injure yourself. I cannot see anybody's shortcomings. If a man does a trifle for me, I try to remember even that. To see fault in others, forgiveness is a great religious austerity. There is no virtue higher than forbearance." This is consistent with the Vedanic teaching that in order to see evil in the world, we must see it as a reflection of what is in our own minds. Therapists call this projection, "If you spot it, you got it." When Swami Turiyananda was asked why there was so much evil in the world, he replied, "Tulsidas says, to the good, the world is full of good, but to the bad, the world is full of evil. The world is neither good nor bad. What I call good, you perhaps call bad in the reverse. Where is the standard? The standard is in our attitude towards life. Each one has his own standard, and with increased experience and insight, the standard changes. The pity is that we still recognize evil. When we become perfectly good ourselves, the whole world will appear good. We see only the reflection of our own minds. See the Lord always in everything, and you will see no evil. A suspicious mind sees evil everywhere. A trusting mind sees only good." End quote. As long as we see faults in others, we know there is still room for us to see more virtue in the world. And if we persist in seeing others' faults, Holy Mother warns us that we not only miss the good, but we endanger our vision as well. It's worth spending a little time on the idea of seeing or finding the faults of others. Holy Mother's words are translated differently in different books. We often see, "If you want peace of mind, do not find fault with others, rather learn to see your own faults." In his biography of Holy Mother, Swami Nikolananda translated Mother's words as, "My child, if you want peace, then do not look into anybody's faults. Look into your own faults." When I asked Swami Chaitananda about this, he went to a Bengali source book and translated Mother's words literally as, "If you want peace, do not see the faults of others." Some translators have obviously tried to express the implied meaning instead of just the literal meaning. We can certainly contrast seeing versus looking into faults as the difference between simply recognizing the faults at a conscious level versus making an active effort of finding them out. I think it's safe to say Mother didn't literally mean don't see the faults of others. There are many instances in Mother's life where she obviously recognized the shortcomings of some of her less than honorable children. So she saw their faults. The difference is what she did with that knowledge. A prime example was the Muslim Amjad, a bandit who had helped build the wall for Mother's new house. At a time when Mother was bedridden with fever, devotees still came to Jaramati to visit her. Nikhilananda wrote, quote, "One morning a brahmachari attending her noticed that an emaciated man of dark complexion, clad in rags and leaning on a stick, had entered the house. As he approached the mother's room, her eyes fell upon him. 'Who is there?' she said in a feeble voice. 'Is it my child, Amjad? Come in.' Amjad entered the room and talked with Mother for some time. In the afternoon, when Amjad was returning home, people found him to be a completely different person. He had taken his bath, filled his stomach with food, and put on a new cloth. He carried in his bundle many gifts from Holy Mother. Amjad, who had been starving all this time, soon recovered his health. He now became devoted to Holy Mother and often got her fruits and other articles not easily obtainable in the neighborhood. He did not, however, give up his profession of thievery. Once, released from jail, he came to Holy Mother with a gourd from his vine. She said, "I've been thinking of you a long time. Where have you been all these days?" He said that he was in jail because he had stolen a cow. She did not pay any heed to his criminal act and said with great kindness, "I was worried by your long absence." Amjad had been in and out of jail many times. During her last illness, Mother came to know that he was again arrested for burglary and remarked, "I knew all the time that Amjad had not given up his old habits." Mother knew that Amjad was a thief, both from others and from Amjad himself. Yet she never chastised his behavior or asked him to give up his bad habits. In the same way, Ramakrishna never told Girish Ghosh to give up drinking. There's no question that Mother saw Amjad's behavior as an incorrigible thief. So she did see his faults and certainly acknowledged their existence. However, in keeping with the second wording, she did not look into them by paying any attention. Stealing was never discussed, either in or out of Amjad's presence. The difference between us and Holy Mother is not in the seeing of faults. It doesn't take a trained psychologist to recognize the foibles of those around us. As a friend says, anyone that can flog a mirror can do that. Or as Ben Franklin put it, any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do. Holy Mother saw the same behaviors any of us would see. It's just that she judged them differently. In fact, she didn't judge them at all. She possessed the trusting mind that Swami Turiyananda referred to earlier. Being completely good herself, she saw only good in others too. The issue is what we do with what we see. Or as comics writer Byron Langenfeld said, "Rare is the person who can weigh the faults of others without putting his thumb on the scales." As long as we continue judging what we see in others negatively, we have not addressed the shortcomings of our own nature. Jesus spoke of exactly the same behavior when he said, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' and behold, the log is in your own eye?" Not only is judging a bad habit, but like many bad habits, it gets in the way of good ones. Mother Teresa said, "If you judge people, you have no time to love them." Another problem with constant judging of others is that we make our own vision worse. Holy Mother said to Yogin Ma Do not look at the faults of others, lest your eyes should become vitiated. By seeing defects in others, our sight too becomes defective. Swami Premananda said similarly, when one goes on finding fault with others, one becomes imperceptibly infected with those faults. We have not come to this world either for fault finding or for correcting others. We have come simply to learn. We must always ask ourselves, what have we learned? This is a wonderful idea, that it's all about learning. And in fact, Mother's words say exactly that. Rather, learn to see your own faults. Learn to make the whole world your own. This is an encouraging, hopeful view of human potential, that it is always possible for us to learn to be better. It is never too late to improve ourselves, and in turn, our opinion of others. Swami Turiyananda spoke to this directly. Quote, everyone wants to exhibit his good side and conceal his defects. Whoever can speak out his own faults frankly will get rid of them. It is not easy to confess one's weaknesses. If anyone can, know that he has worth in him, end quote. By ferreting out our own faults and learning to do things differently, we improve ourselves and others as well, because we see them with a positive light. Cautions about fault-finding have been around for centuries, from Plutarch to Rumi to Ben Franklin, Mother Teresa, and many others. It's reasonable to ask why there is such a universal struggle to see others positively. Where do our common negative tendencies come from? To answer that question, let's turn to neuroscience and neuropsychology, areas that address the connections between our brains and how we behave. The relevant concept here is called the negativity bias, a psychological phenomenon where humans pay more attention to negative experiences and information than positive ones. Research has shown that if given two approximately balanced experiences, one positive and one negative, we feel worse than neutral. We feel the sting of insult more powerfully than the joy of praise. If we receive two pieces of information about someone we don't know, one positive and one negative, guess how we feel about the stranger? Negative. And the best one, it takes people 5 positive interactions to balance a single negative one. An explanation given for this negativity bias is that in the course of human evolution, survival was determined much more by threats than by opportunities. If we made the mistake of thinking there was a tiger in the bushes and ran away 100 times when there wasn't one, it was still far preferable to even once making the opposite mistake of not running when the tiger really was there, which was a certain end to our gene pool. We survived by being overly sensitive to danger, even if we were wrong most of the time. So humans tend to overreact to threats and to underestimate opportunities. Our aversion to sticks is stronger than our attraction to carrots. Or as neuropsychologist Rick Hansen says, the brain is Velcro for negative experiences, but Teflon for positive ones. Bad has more impact on us than good, so we're more likely to see it around us. It means we pay more attention to the bad things that happen, making them seem more important than they really are. I can't resist throwing in here that research shows a correlation between political affiliation and negativity bias. Conservatives are more sensitive to negative stimuli and tend towards right-leaning ideologies, while those with lower negativity bias tend to lean towards more liberal political policies. With an evolved negativity bias, we have a built-in tendency to find fault with those around us. From a practical standpoint, there are many reasons we may find it psychologically comfortable to do so. If we're not sure of ourselves or lack healthy self-esteem, when we find others to be flawed and somewhat less than admirable, by comparison, it can make us seem faultless and virtuous. If we're angry or have had an argument with someone, finding fault can help justify the anger or try to win others to our side. If we're jealous of someone, finding fault with them can make us feel like they're not so admirable and that we're the one to be appreciated instead. If we talk to a friend and discuss others' mistakes and negative qualities, both of us can feel good that we're better than those we're talking about, especially if we say right afterwards, "God bless his heart," which is a sure giveaway we have spoken someone else's faults. If we become convinced that we really want to change one of our own less than desirable behaviors to stop doing, is there really hope for altering old, long-established bad habits? Here again, neuropsychology has something to say about the process. This concept is called neuroplasticity, which is the reasonably simple idea that the brain changes both structurally and functionally as a result of environmental input. This is not a new concept at all. We can think of it as karma in action. The more we do something, the easier it becomes to redo. For any consistently executed behavior, we tend to get better at it because the repeated patterns create familiar pathways in our brain. It's like the old joke about asking a street musician in New York how to get to Carnegie Hall. His answer? Practice, practice, practice. If we make up our mind to practice anything regularly, the end result is a change in our brains, which reflects that practice. A University College London team scanned the brains of cabbies in training before and after trying to master what's called the knowledge, which is the locations of the 25,000 streets and 20,000 landmarks and other points of interest within a 6-mile radius of Charing Cross, a junction of roads considered to be the center of London. This process, if successful, takes from 2 to 4 years, and the team found through brain scans that the posterior hippocampus, a portion of the brain related to spatial memory, had significantly increased in size compared to non-cabbies, direct evidence of the adult brain's ability to change due to environmental stimulus. If we faithfully practice new behavior, our brains can make changes to accommodate it. We can use our minds to change our brains, which in turn can change our minds for the better. Armed with the knowledge that our determined mind can change both our brains and our behavior, where do we begin to address the issue of finding fault with others? As we discussed earlier, the root of the problem is not in seeing faults, but in judging them. So our underlying attitude is the first thing that needs to change. Even if we have the control to not say anything verbally about someone we're critical of, we've judged them mentally, then the attitude is still there. A disparaging look or a roll of the eyes when the person is mentioned is quite enough to indicate that. So we need to work on mental judging, which is quite a challenge in itself. As Plutarch said, to find fault is easy, to do better may be difficult. To be aware of the judging is the first step in doing something about it. Everything that comes to our senses must first be recognized based on our previous experience, whether it's animate or inanimate, animal, mineral, familiar, unfamiliar, named or not, black, white, color, etc. Once we've decided that, our judging takes over, usually based on an incomplete set of rules, scales, and stereotypes that make a value assessment. After judging, we decide what is done in response, if anything, and if a response is required, what kind, mental, verbal, physical, or a combination. This whole process is non-stop while we're awake. We can't stop the endless process of images and impressions supplied by our eyes and other senses. We can't stop the classification and recognition, nor would we want to. We need to identify what we see, as our relationships and our interaction with the world depend on them. It's the judging we need to work on. Most of the time we judge without having enough information to know the whole story, but we go ahead anyway. And unfortunately, the judgment usually determines our reaction. If we label an impression negative coming in, we're likely to send a negative response out as well. We have to turn this around. If we want positive going out, we need to have positive coming in. So judging simply has to change. The problem with judging is that it hurts others as well as ourselves. It adds negativity to a world already full of it. It drives wedges between people and relationships. We need to make our best attempts to stop judging and give everyone a positive evaluation. Or to borrow from Garrison Keillor, let everyone be above average. When Swami Niranjanananda came to Ramakrishna, the master told him, "Look here, my boy, if one does 99 good turns to a person and one bad, the person remembers the bad one and forgets the others. But if he does 99 bad turns to God and one good, the Lord remembers the good one and forgets all the rest. This is the difference between human love and divine love. Remember this." That's the ideal. Always seeing and remembering the good and not the bad. This is indeed what Holy Mother did. She decided to see only the good in others and ignore the bad. Not only that, she saw the good in a magnified way, so even little virtues became substantial ones. Swami Saradeshananda was a disciple of Holy Mother and had the great privilege of serving her for months at a time. Based on this close interaction, he wrote The Mother as I Saw Her, a wonderful book filled with many personal and illuminating stories about Mother. Bob Berninger and I were very fortunate to meet him in Vrindavan when we went to India in 1986. Earlier, in 1977, Swami Chaitananda visited Swami Saradeshananda and asked him, "Swami, you served Holy Mother for several years in Jarambati. Please tell me, what impressed you most about her life?" "Humility," answered the Swami. Mother was completely egoless. At this point, I could understand it if you said, "I thought we were talking about finding faults and you're bringing up humility." Well, there's a very logical explanation here. Truly humble people typically do not find fault with others because their egos have no need to do so. Holy people may, however, find fault with others as part of their spiritual instruction, but that's not what we're talking about here. One useful way to see fault-finding is as a clever device of the ego to draw attention away from itself. Instead of focusing on our own faults, we project them on others, which lets the ego feel that it's just fine and not part of the problem. People with true humility don't fall into this trap. I had to mention that so you wouldn't fault me for spending a little time on humility before we come back to our main topic. In the present age, humility is a virtue out of fashion. If you do a Google search on improving confidence, there are about 456 million results. Improving kindness has around 180 million results, while improving humility returns only 48 million. This devaluing of humility is a great detriment to our society, considering the reverence given to it throughout history by many wise persons. Consider these quotes. "Humility is the solid foundation of all virtues." Confucius. "We come nearest to the great when we are great in humility." Rabindranath Tagore. "In the course of my life, I've often had to eat my words, and I must confess that I've always found it a wholesome diet." Winston Churchill. "True humility does not know that it is humble. If it did, it would be proud from the contemplation of so fine a virtue." Martin Luther. We'll give the last word to Yogi Berra, who had a talent for malapropisms. "It ain't the heat, it's the humility." So why has humility gone so far out of fashion? Simplistically, following World War II, the state of individual consciousness shifted from one of self-effacement and self-development to one of self-promotion. Analysts say we are more self-centered, egotistic, and more narcissistic than we were even 20 years ago. The popularity and very name of the selfie belies this absorption with self. Surveys of young people have shown clear generational increases in self-importance, self-esteem, assertiveness, high expectations, and narcissism. Overall, they present a clear cultural shift toward individualism with focus on the self. David Brooks, The New York Times columnist and author says, quote, "We now live in a culture of the big me, a culture of meritocracy where we promote ourselves, and a social media culture where we broadcast highlight reels of our lives," end quote. Unfortunately, this focus on self is unrealistic. The comic book artist Bernard Bailey wryly noted, "When science discovers the center of the universe, a lot of people will be disappointed to find they are not it." This rise of self-centeredness and self-promotion signaled a concomitant decrease in concern for others. If you are more concerned with your own thoughts and feelings because they seem more real, more urgent, more important, then it diminishes your capacity to recognize the needs and feelings of others. A University of Michigan study in 2010 showed that college students were 40% less empathetic than they were only 20 or 30 years earlier. Holy Mother said, "The purpose of one's life is fulfilled only when one is able to give joy to others." How can we do that if concern for self has crowded out our feeling for others? Because humility seems intrinsically tied to not finding faults, it's worth looking at some notable traits of truly humble people who, by definition, do not let self come before other. Humble people have a realistic opinion of themselves. True humility is not weakness. Humble people know their self-worth and are able to keep their talents and accomplishments, as well as their weaknesses and failures, in the proper perspective. They know their strengths as well as their limits. Mother Teresa said, "If you are humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know what you are. If you are blamed, you will not be discouraged. If they call you a saint, you will not put yourself on a pedestal." Humble people take responsibility for their actions. They don't blame others or make excuses. They own what they need to own, and what doesn't belong to them, they know. Humble people can accept advice. Their motto might be, "Admit when you're wrong, say nothing when you're right." Humility is slow to judge others, but quick to correct itself, which is exactly what Holy Mother suggested in her third sentence. Rather, learn to find your own faults. David Brooks writes in his book, The Road to Character, "Truly humble people are engaged in a great effort to magnify what is best in themselves and defeat what is worst, to become strong in the weak places." To become strong in the weak places. Humble people have a low sense of entitlement. They don't feel they own things. They are grateful for what they have. Entitled people put themselves at the center. Humble people value others first. Humble people are more kind and more generous. While they may reflect inwardly, humble people act outwardly. They put others before themselves. Humility is a consistent predictor of generosity. Humble people tend to be more generous with both their time and their money. Humble people have healthier relationships. Who wouldn't appreciate being in a relationship with someone that was quick to forgive or apologize, slow to condemn, and appreciated you just as you are? Holy people are always humble people. Humility and ego are polar opposites. They do not live well together. It's like Swami Seshananda's assertion that God vision and television don't go together. So it should be no surprise that truly holy people are always humble people. Ramakrishna cleaned the toilets in the temple garden with his long hair to erase any sense of superiority over the untouchable sweepers. Holy Mother lived at M's house for a month. Before leaving, she presented the cook with dhotis, money, and bowed down to him. Then she asked his blessing with folded hands. Vivekananda declined to attend a performance by a dancing girl, thinking it was inappropriate for a monk. Hearing her song about the Lord's same-sidedness, he was deeply ashamed and joined the party with tears in his eyes, begging her forgiveness. think of it. Most virtues, like muscles, can be strengthened and weakened by how we use them. If we truly believe, like many humble people, that one of our main goals in life is to strengthen our weak places, then if we are too weak in humility and too strong in pride, with practice, we can shift that balance in favor of humility. Mother Teresa, like Confucius, called humility the mother of all virtues. She created a list of ways to cultivate humility for the sisters in her order. I have the list framed in my bathroom, so it's never too far away. I won't recite the whole list, but I'll mention 4 in particular from the beginning. To speak as little as possible about oneself, to mind one's own business, to not want to manage other people's affairs, to not dwell on the faults of others. As you can hear, these relate nicely to fault-finding as well. So this is a good point to return to our main topic and what we can actually do to reduce fault-finding. Of course, it's not as easy as saying, well, Holy Mother says do not find fault with others, so I'll stop doing it. Bad habits are rarely conquered overnight. Fortunately, many people have given much thought to practices which limit fault-finding. So here is a list of 6 things I compiled for all of us to practice, with the easier ones first. We have to start somewhere. As the Chinese proverb says, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Number 1, practice being the observer. This means not judging or reacting to what our senses bring to us. Just watch the images come in and pass through, with no other actions after they're recognized. Before we can get to positive, we need to be neutral. Observers just watch and note whatever is seen, with no judging of good or bad, and no response, either external or internal. It's all right to think, isn't that interesting? But there should be no spin on the comment. Being the observer can be hard to do when we've already made up our mind about someone or something. It's hard to ignore a judgment label once it's in place. A good start is to let the image pass through, label and all, without response, just like everything else. Grouchy person, interesting, image gone, next. Egotistic person, interesting, image gone, next. Later, we can work on removing the judging labels. When we're successful being the observer, images, thoughts, and sensations come, are recognized, and pass through the mind, which remains unmoved. By just observing and nothing else, we get accustomed to bypassing the judging. The mindfulness taught in Buddhism is particularly helpful in practicing observing. Our friendly Google librarian can provide lots of resources on mindfulness. Number 1, practice being the observer. 2, practice learning from what you observe. As Thoreau said, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. If we're going to be looking anyway, we might as well get something out of it, and there's no end to learning. As we observe people and truly see their interactions, we can recognize behaviors we don't want to emulate, as well as those that we do. It's particularly instructive to observe people known to be humble and kind, compare their behaviors to ours, learn what they're doing better, and try to emulate them. The idea of learning is particularly appropriate here. As Ramakrishna himself said that Holy Mother was an incarnation of Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and born to bestow knowledge on others. As we quoted earlier, Swami Premananda said, "We have not come to this world either for fault-finding or for correcting others. We have come simply to learn. We must always ask ourselves, what have we learned?" Number 2, practice learning from what you observe. 3, practice verbal continence where people are concerned. There's a fine quote which I was disappointed to find out can't be attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, who's popularly thought, but it is worthwhile nevertheless. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Small minds discuss people. There certainly are valid reasons for talking about people, but more often it's a trap. Financier and statesman Bernard Baruch said, "Two things are bad for the heart, running upstairs and running down people." As my mother often said, and probably yours too, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That's not only good advice for kids, but for all of us. It's very easy to fall into the trap of talking about people when they're not there, and just as easy for it to have a critical or condescending tone. It's often best not to talk about people at all. And if it's not nice, it's certainly better to leave it out. Number 3, practice verbal continence. 4, practice prayer. If we were able to pray all the time, we probably won't have the time or inclination to find faults. In Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians, he tells them to pray without ceasing, which is often cited in instructions on using the Jesus prayer continually. Those who have heard Swami Sridharananda's reminiscences will recall the "Are you?" question his mentor asked sharply at surprise times of the day. The purpose was to make sure he was saying his mantra at all times. Prayer grounds the mind and reminds us of our connection to God and to the God in others. If we are thinking positively of God, it makes it much more difficult to think negatively of others. Regular prayer is very effective in overcoming the negative tendencies of the mind. Number 4, practice prayer. 5, practice being nice to those you find difficult. This is a real test of going from negative to positive. If you're like most of us, having a hard time with someone means we have less than positive feelings about them as well, which we need to get over. Mother Teresa said, "People are unrealistic, illogical, and self-centered. Love them anyway." Finding someone trying is no reason they shouldn't get the same consideration and fellow feeling we give to our friends. In fact, they need it even more. Many of us have prayer lists for those who are facing hard times due to illness, personal loss, or other difficulties. Why not add people you find challenging to that prayer list? It's a good way to start developing positive feelings toward them and of turning it all over to God. Starting with those we find difficult is also the first step toward one of Jesus' highest teachings. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Number 5, practice being nice to those you find difficult. 6, the last and most difficult. Practice always thinking positively of others. The remedy for a weakening thought is to think the opposite thought. Overcome bad with good. One Buddhist teacher suggested to a group of Dharma students that they say something positive every day for a month, particularly to those they didn't like much. When one man reported back, he said one day he couldn't find anyone to compliment and made up something to say to a difficult coworker. To his amazement, the next day the person was so nice to him, he was able to recognize his good qualities. This practice of positive feeling towards all is exemplified by the Buddhist meditative practice of metta bhavana, or loving kindness, where one progressively practices loving kindness towards oneself, then towards a respected person, towards a neutral person, towards a difficult person, towards all 4 of these equally, and then finally, gradually, towards the entire universe. Through this practice, Buddha sought to develop the mental habit of selfless or altruistic love. It's exactly what Holy Mother was talking about when she said, "Learn to make the whole world your own. No one is a stranger, my child. This whole world is your own." Through regular practice, the mind becomes accustomed to sending positive thoughts to all, and the negativity bias is replaced by a positive one. Number 6, practice always thinking positively of others. Even Holy Mother, our exemplar in this matter, had to work on not finding fault. As we mentioned, she prayed to Radha Raman, "Lord, please take away my fault-finding nature. May I never see others' blemishes." Later, she said, "Formerly, I too used to notice others' faults. Then I prayed to the Master, and through his grace got rid of this habit. It's the very nature of man to see defects. You should learn to appreciate virtues. Man is no doubt liable to err, but you must not take notice. If you constantly find fault with others, you will see fault alone." Holy Mother considered herself the mother of all, regardless of their status or behavior. Even Ramakrishna would test disciples before accepting them, but Holy Mother accepted all without discrimination. A real mother does not keep only the good children. When asked to discipline some noisy monks at Udbodhan, she replied, "What can I do? I don't see fault in others, so how can I discipline them? Moreover, I am their mother. How can I punish them? I receive them, cleaning their dirt and impurities. They are all children of the Master. Is it so easy to punish them? He has his own way to make everything right. His overwhelming love will make them straight. God's judgment is well balanced, and there is not a slightest mistake in it. And again, there is no end of his mercy." In her message to Annapurna's mother on Thursday, July 16, 1920, which was also her last message to all of us, Holy Mother is asking us to follow her own example, to find fault only with ourselves, and to feel at home with all in God's world. By doing so, we are promised peace of mind, one of the greatest possible blessings in this difficult human life. May we not accuse, demand, or complain, but love, respect, and cooperate with all. May we not find fault with others, but learn to find our own faults. May we not treat others as strangers, but learn to make all our own. May we feel the whole world to be our own. That is my prayer for all of us today. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May no harm come to any. May no difficulties come to any. May all have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome the inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. May all learn to be mindful at all times. May all think of others at all times. May all realize the Supreme Self shining within as the innermost self. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.